source of revenue for the support of the state. Then there is no competition. I remarked. I suppose the prices for the different grades are purely arbitrary with this bureau. No, the price of nothing is arbitrary, returned the tailor. The value of everything being fixed by the average cost of production, as ascertained by the bureau in the most careful and scientific manner. There must be, said I, some unsaleable goods made, as there is in my country. Does the exchange have to take them at the production price, regardless of what they will sell for? The exchange sometimes has goods that will not sell for the established price by reason of their undesirability, damage in storage, or other causes. When that is the case, they are cut to the selling point. It frequently happens too, especially with agricultural productions, that the price of one article is reduced, while that of other things, which compete with it or displace it, is raised. The Bureau has all of that in hand and the business is reduced to a science. The exchange also has the right to reject anything, and so producers keep in touch with it and thus know what the public demand is for. Here was another field opened up to my curiosity which I would have liked very much to explore by further questioning, but my outfitter did his work expeditiously and lunch was waiting. At the table I introduced the subject and asked why the manufacture of cloth by machinery was prohibited in the Iron Republic. We prohibit the use of machinery in the making of cloth, answered my host, for the same reason that we do in the manufacture of everything else that the people can supply without the aid of machinery, that is, that there may be work for all. Do I understand that you have no manufactures at all? I asked. Not that we have none at all, but none for the manufacture of any article that can be applied on sufficient quantity to meet the demand, without the use of machinery. This list includes fabrics of almost every description: shoes, hats, headwear, furniture, rope, agricultural implements and products, vehicles, in fact almost everything that we use. And the purpose of this is that there may be work for all to do. That is the purpose, replied my host, and the purpose is accomplished, for as it requires the work of all to supply the wants of all, there is no enforced idleness in this republic. But, said I, with a disposition to argue every point, one man with a machine can do the work of 100, and it seems to me that with your admirable political conditions, you might well employ the use of machinery, thereby giving the people more time for recreation and the improvement of the mind. Certainly there is great temptation to use a machine that will do the work of 100 men, replied my host, and if the 100 men were the beneficiaries of its efficiency, there could be no excuse for not using it. You employ labor-saving machinery in the United States, and where it does the work of 100 or 1,000 men, do they get the benefit of it? I could not say that they did. As a matter of fact, continued my host, does anybody derive any benefit except the owners of the machine? I was obliged to confess that they were the only direct beneficiaries, but that the cost of production was lessened, which of course, must be to the advantage of all. Ah! My friend, exclaimed the professor, I very much fear that your argument is influenced by your legal training, for it is palpably one-sided, being predicated on the assumption that a machine doing the work of 100 men, lessens the price of its products without diminishing the purchasing power of the 100 men who have been deprived of work by it. Now let us come down to practical illustration. You use machinery in the manufacture of shoes. To what extent does it lessen labor and cost? Very much indeed, I answered, warming up to the advantage one thought I saw. With improved machinery and a division of labor. I have been informed that a man can make a pair of shoes every 7 minutes, at a cost of 30 cents. Very well, if you are not positive though as to the accuracy of your data, we will allow some latitude and say they make a pair in 12 minutes, at a cost of 50 cents. That will be 50 pairs in a day of 10 hours. Your man with the machine then has done the work of 50 men. What pay does he receive? From the best of my information, an average of about $2 per pay. I replied. Your man is paid $2 a day and turns out a product that sells for $25 in. Oh no. I interrupted, that costs $25 to make. I see, said my host smiling, this is the cost of making. Now what do these shoes sell for? I should say an average of $1.50. Ah. Then this man does the work of 50 men and turns out a product that is worth $100 more than the cost of production. Who gets this $100? Asked my host, laying down his fork and looking across the table at me with an air of affected simplicity. The man or company that owns the machine, I suppose, I answered, slightly nettled. Then the 49 men whose work has been done for them do not come in except in the matter of increased time for recreation. But what surprises me most, my host went on, is that these shoes can be made for 50 cents and sold for $150. How is this feat, so contrary to the laws of competition, accomplished? In the first place, I answered, our manufacturers combine to maintain prices among themselves, and in the second place we have a tariff which brings the imported article up to that price. So, exclaimed my host, I begin to comprehend your system, which I presume was the same when I left the country, but as I was quite a young man and had never paid much attention to such matters, I retain no knowledge on the subject. Now let us look into the system in its practical application. Here is a machine that in one day, with the application of one man's labor, does the work of 50 men, thereby depriving 49 men of the opportunity to work. In the value of the product, it turns out, it earns the wages of 50 men, and yet all that labor gets out of it is the paltry sum of $2, or not enough to pay for the result of 15 minutes of its time, the balance going to the owner of the machine. So while flesh and blood and brains and skill earns $2 for labor, wood and iron and steel earns $50 for capital. And this wonderful machine too, in all probability, is the product of skill and labor at the same miserable wage. Is this system conducive to an equitable distribution of wealth among the people? Does it not rather impoverish the 49 men whose work is done by the machine, and enrich one man who gets the value of 50 men's work for the price of one? I could not deny so logical a conclusion. Now in the Iron Republic, continued the professor, where machinery is not allowed to supplant labor, to produce 50 pairs of shoes in one day would probably require the work of 50 men, and the value of their product would be divided among them. So the question resolves itself into this proposition: which is better, to let 50 men earn $1 apiece, or to let 2 men earn $100, one of whom works while the other keeps books, of which amount the working man gets $2 while the bookkeeper gets the balance? The proposition did not admit of debate, but I could not refrain from remarking that it seemed a pity that 50 men should labor a day to accomplish what an inanimate machine might do without toil or fatigue. Not necessarily, retorted my host. In appearance and according to the ethics of industrial economy, there could be no objection to the machine doing the work of 50 men if the 50 men got the benefit of its work. And yet it is contrary to the divine economy, as expressed in the biblical injunction that man shall eat bread by the sweat of his brow, and like every other human practice that runs contrary to the divine order, is harmful in its results, and I think your system must demonstrate it. Notwithstanding the use of machinery, you doubtless have a large number of men who are steadily and permanently employed, now, which makes the best showing, mentally and morally, this steadily employed class, or the unemployed or partially employed class whose time for recreation and the improvement of the mind has been increased by the use of machinery. I was compelled to confess that the employed class took precedence both in point of intelligence and morals. I remarked too, that it was a disappointing fact that our public libraries, night schools, and other institutions founded for the benefit and elevation of the masses, were least patronized by those of most leisure. It is not strange, said my host. The reasonable employment of the body prepares the mind for recreation. A man's mind, though especially if it be not well cultivated, having nothing to employ it but recreation, grows bad just as most boys do who have nothing to do but play. The universe is founded on a plan, and that plan contemplates that every man shall work. The man, who does not, suffers, and society suffers by him. There are no exceptions to this rule. I confess that you have had the better of me all along. Said I, but you are certainly mistaken when you say that there are no exceptions to this rule, for many of our most intelligent and virtuous men are those who have grown vastly rich from the results of other men's labor. I may say most generous also, for in my country hundreds of churches, colleges, libraries, and other beneficent institutions stand as monuments to this virtue in them today. Undoubtedly, assented the professor, and yet I must remind you in the first place that a man who becomes a millionaire from the increment of other men's labor, can be no idler, for the mere keeping up with his business and getting the lions, tigers and wolves' share of the product of the labor employed by him, will keep him busy. And in the second place, when a man makes gifts with money obtained that way, is such generosity in any manner different from that of Robin Hood, who robbed one class and gave to another? Is it even as commendable, for the old highwayman invariably took from the rich and gave to the poor, at the worst doing evil that good might come, by contributing to the equalization of wealth, while your millionaires take from the poor and give in such a way as to enhance their reputation, this being the only thing to be desired after having acquired more money than they can use in promoting their pleasures? From my point of view, there is no more generosity in such actions than there was in Trajan's lavish expenditure on his tomb. I think you will find too, that the sons of these millionaires who inherit the money without the training that came with its accumulation, will suffer and make society suffer, thus proving the old Bible doctrine that the sins of the parents are visited on the children unto the third and fourth generation. That doctrine may be true in theory, I replied laughing, but in my country the first generation usually exhausts the possibility of the evil by getting rid of the root of it. In as far as the money itself may contribute directly to the evil, assented my host, but a life of profligacy and dissipation made possible by inherited wealth may leave a train of evils behind it extending to generations unborn. Then you regard wealth as an evil, do you? I asked. I certainly regard wealth as a most prolific source of evil, and where it is acquired in the manner we have been discussing, that is, where a poor man is required to make shoes for a rich man for 50 cents and then pay $1.50 for the same shoes for himself and family to wear, it is an evil per se. You say this is partly the result of legislation, and if it is, yours is a government of the minority, for there must be fewer rich than poor men. I grant what you say, I replied. Government is of, for, and by the rich, always has been and probably always will be, because wealth is power. But it does not necessarily follow that for that reason it is bad. In the cooperation of mind and matter in the affairs of human government, as in everything else, mind must predominate. In predominating, it secures the conditions of life most favorable to itself and thus extends its sphere, as in an exploring party a few men by getting more than their share of food are enabled to penetrate faster and further than their comrades. But as they blaze the way they open up, it is easier for the rest to follow, and so I believe the world has been the gainer by the very inequalities and injustice, which you condemn. In its age-long and worldwide advance, the human mind has not marched in a phalanx. Under favoring conditions the strongest and boldest have broken away and led the advance, scaling walls to others impregnable and climbing heights inaccessible to the average and placing beacon lights to make the ascent easier for those that follow. My dear sir, exclaimed the professor, your figure is very pretty, but I think it is so only because of the beautiful words in which you have clothed it. Skill in the art of dressing may be made to hide many defects, with a sly glance at the ladies, but I am not going to be taken in by mere external appearances. It is not your figure I find fault with but your logic.